What if the answers to our most pressing agricultural challenges have been sitting on forgotten shelves for centuries? Picture this yellowed parchment, handwritten in ink faded by time, tucked away in the shadowy corners of medieval monasteries. These aren't just relics of the past, they're treasure troves of wisdom, packed with farming techniques so ingenious they could reshape how we grow food today. In our race toward industrial-scale agriculture, we've overlooked something vital: the sustainable practices perfected by farmers hundreds of years ago. Their methods, crafted through trial and error, honed by generations, hold secrets we're only now beginning to rediscover. Think about the sheer irony. Modern farms, armed with cutting-edge technology, are struggling with depleted soil, water scarcity, and chemical dependency. Meanwhile, medieval farmers thrived without synthetic fertilizers or heavy machinery. They worked with nature, not against it, rotating crops to keep soil fertile, planting diverse species to deter pests, and conserving water with simple yet brilliant systems. These weren't just random experiments, they were carefully documented in manuals passed down like heirlooms, yet somewhere along the way, we dismissed them as outdated, irrelevant. But what if the opposite is true? What if these forgotten texts are the missing pieces in our quest for sustainability? This isn't just about history, it's about survival. As climate change tightens its grip and farmland shrinks, we're forced to confront a hard truth: our current systems are failing. But here's the hope: those medieval scribes might have left us a roadmap. Their techniques weren't just sustainable, they were regenerative, designed to leave the land richer than they found it. Imagine blending their time-tested wisdom with modern science. The result: a farming revolution that could feed billions without sacrificing the planet. So let's dig into these ancient pages together, uncovering the lessons buried in ink and parchment. Because sometimes the future isn't ahead of us, it's waiting in the past. Take a medieval farm: no tractors, no chemical sprays, just a carefully orchestrated dance between crops, livestock, and the land itself. These farmers didn't just grow food, they built resilient ecosystems. One of their most powerful tools, crop diversity. While modern fields stretch for miles with just corn or wheat, medieval plots were vibrant tapestries of grains, legumes, and vegetables, each plant playing a strategic role. Peas and beans, for example, weren't just food, they were nature's fertilizer, pulling nitrogen from the air and fixing it into the soil. Mustard plants acted as pest deterrents, their sharp scent driving away insects that might harm nearby crops. Every choice was deliberate, every plant a piece of a larger puzzle. And then there's the three-field system, a stroke of genius lost to time until recently. Instead of exhausting the soil by planting the same crop year after year, farmers divided their land into thirds. One section grew winter wheat, another spring barley, and the third lay fallow, resting and recovering. But here's the brilliance: that fallow field wasn't just empty. Farmers let animals graze there, their manure naturally replenishing the soil. By rotating these sections annually, the land stayed fertile for generations. Compare that to today's monocultures, where soil degradation is a ticking time bomb. The real shocker: medieval pest control didn't rely on synthetic chemicals. Farmers planted marigolds to repel nematodes, scattered garlic to ward off aphids, and even used ducks to patrol rice paddies, gobbling up insects and weeds. These weren't random tricks, they were meticulously recorded in manuals passed down like sacred knowledge. One 14th century text from England details how to attract ladybugs, nature's pest control, by planting yarrow and dill. It's a level of ecological intuition that puts our spray first ask questions, later approach to shame. What's haunting is how much of this wisdom vanished when industrial farming took over. The shift to machinery and chemicals promised efficiency, but at what cost? Medieval farmers measured success not just in bushels harvested, but in the health of their land decades later. Their manuals speak of stewardship, of leaving the earth better than they found it. Today, as we grapple with dead zones in the ocean from fertilizer runoff and topsoil erosion that could take centuries to rebuild, their approach feels less like history and more like prophecy. Maybe progress isn't always about moving forward, sometimes it's about circling back to what worked all along. The three-field system wasn't just a clever trick, it was a masterclass in working with nature's rhythms. Picture a medieval village where every strip of land had a purpose, a cycle as predictable as the seasons. Winter wheat sown in one field would feed families through the cold months, while spring barley in another would thrive as temperatures rose. But the real magic happened in that third field, left untouched for a year. Modern eyes might see emptiness, but medieval farmers saw potential. That fallow ground wasn't idle. It was rebuilding itself, its soil soaking up nutrients from grazing livestock and decomposing plant matter. This wasn't just rotation, it was resurrection. What's astonishing is how precisely these farmers understood balance. Their manuals don't just list crops, they explain why certain plants followed others. After barley, which drained nitrogen from the soil, they'd plant peas or lentils, nature's fertilizer factories. The manuals even specified which livestock to graze where, noting how sheep's manure differed from cows in nourishing the land. Compare that to today's monocultures, where identical crops suck the same nutrients from the same soil year after year until it's little more than dust. Medieval farmers didn't have soil science textbooks, but their observations were so sharp they might as well have written them. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. The three-field system wasn't just about yield, it was about resilience. When pests or bad weather struck one crop, the other two fields acted as a buffer against famine. A village might lose its winter wheat to blight, but the spring barley and fallow fields' wild grasses kept both people and livestock fed. It was a built-in safety net, something industrial farming sacrificed for the illusion of efficiency. Today, when a single disease wipes out entire regions of genetically identical crops, that medieval wisdom feels painfully relevant. The echoes of this system are everywhere in modern regenerative agriculture. No-till farming, that's the fallow fields logic. Disturb the soil less, let it heal. Cover crops like clover or rye. They're doing exactly what medieval legumes did, fixing nitrogen and preventing erosion. Even crop insurance programs designed to mitigate risk mirror the medieval strategy of diversifying plantings across seasons. The difference, those old manuals treated sustainability as common sense, not a revolutionary concept. Perhaps the most humbling lesson lies in the timelines. Medieval fields remained productive for centuries without synthetic inputs, while today's industrial farms often exhaust their soil in decades. Those forgotten manuals didn't just record techniques, they encoded patience and understanding that land isn't a factory, but a living system. As we scramble to reinvent sustainable agriculture, it's worth asking, are we discovering something new or finally reading the instructions that were there all along? Imagine walking through a medieval garden, not rows of identical plants, but a vibrant patchwork where every pairing tells a story. Carrots nestle beside rosemary, their fragrant leaves confusing carrot flies. Tall corn stalks shield tender squash vines from the sun, while beans twine upward, feeding the soil with nitrogen. This wasn't just happenstance, it was strategy, meticulously recorded in farming manuals as companion planting, an art so precise it turned gardens into self-sustaining ecosystems. The brilliance of these pairings lies in their simplicity. Take the classic Three Sisters method, practiced from medieval Europe to Native American tribes: corn, beans, and squash grown together. The corn provides structure for beans to climb, the beans enrich the soil, and the squash's broad leaves shade the ground, suppressing weeds and locking in moisture. No synthetic fertilizers, no irrigation systems, just plants working in harmony. Medieval texts describe similar trios, like peas planted between rows of barley, their roots loosening compacted soil while feeding neighboring grains. But the real shocker, these farmers understood pest control in ways we're only now rediscovering. Their manuals specify marigolds not just as decorations, but as bodyguards, their roots exuding chemicals that repel nematodes, microscopic worms that ravage modern crops. Garlic planted near roses deterred aphids. Basil grown with tomatoes enhanced their flavor and repelled whiteflies. Even weeds had purpose. Nettles, often yanked from today's fields, were kept near cabbages to attract predatory insects that devoured caterpillars. What's heartbreaking is how industrial agriculture bulldozed this wisdom. A medieval farmer would scoff at the idea of planting acres of identical crops. Monocultures are pest buffets, requiring constant chemical intervention. Yet their manuals warned against such imbalance. A 15th century text from France advises, "Plant not all thy onions in one bed, lest the rot take them all." Diversity was their insurance policy. If one crop failed, others thrived. Modern science now confirms what these farmers knew instinctively. Studies show that companion planting can reduce pest damage by up to 60%, slash the need for fertilizers, and even boost yield. In Kenya, farmers reviving medieval maize-bean intercropping saw harvests rise by 50%. So why did we ever abandon these methods? The answer lies in the 20th century's obsession with scale and speed, machines that demanded uniformity, chemicals that promised quick fixes. But as pesticide-resistant superbugs and depleted soil plague modern farms, those old manuals start to look less like folklore and more like blueprints for survival. The deeper lesson here isn't just about plants, it's about perspective. Medieval farmers saw their fields as living networks where every organism had a role. Today, we're relearning that mindset under labels like agroecology and permaculture, but the roots trace back to those handwritten pages, perhaps the most humbling revelation. The solutions to our most urgent farming crises weren't invented in a lab. They've been pressed between the pages of forgotten manuals, waiting for us to listen. Long before laboratory-made fertilizers, medieval farmers treated soil like a living pantry, stocking it not with chemicals, but with nature's own nutrients. Their manuscripts reveal astonishingly sophisticated composting systems, detailing everything from the perfect ratio of straw to manure to the exact number of days needed for decomposition. One 13th century manual from Spain instructs farmers to layer kitchen scraps, animal dung, and fallen leaves, as a baker layers his dough, turning the pile every full moon to aerate it. This wasn't just waste disposal, it was alchemy, transforming refuse into black gold. What's revolutionary is how these farmers understood soil biology centuries before microscopes revealed microbes. Their texts speak of Earth teeming with unseen life, warning against tilling too deeply lest the little creatures suffocate. They even had methods to test soil health, burying a linen cloth and digging it up weeks later to see how much microbes had decomposed it. Compare that to 20th century agriculture, which treated soil as a sterile holding medium, dousing it in chemicals that killed off the very organisms medieval farmers cherished. The real game changer was their use of green manure crops grown not to harvest but to sacrifice. Clover, vetch, and ryegrass were sown specifically to be plowed under, their rotting roots feeding the soil like a slow-release fertilizer. A 15th century Flemish manual describes planting buckwheat in exhausted fields, noting how its rapid growth cheats the land into thinking it has rested. These weren't just techniques, they were acts of reciprocity, giving back to the earth as much as was taken. Today, the consequences of ignoring this wisdom are stark. Synthetic fertilizers might boost short-term yields, but they've decimated topsoil. The Midwest has lost nearly half its fertile layer since the 1950s. Meanwhile, medieval compost heaps left soil richer with each generation. Archaeologists studying abandoned medieval farms still find patches of unnaturally dark, crumbly earth, testament to centuries of careful stewardship. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in their waste philosophy. Where modern agriculture sees manure as a disposal problem, medieval manuals called it the field supper. Every scrap, from urine-soaked straw to fish guts, was meticulously recycled. One English text even specifies which weeds make the best compost additives, noting how nettles accelerate decomposition. This wasn't sustainability as a buzzword, it was survival, a recognition that nothing could be wasted in nature's closed loop. Now science is racing to catch up. Studies show compost-treated soils retain 40% more water during droughts and grow plants with naturally higher pest resistance. In India, farmers reviving medieval green manure practices have cut fertilizer costs by 70% while doubling yields. The bitter irony: modern agribusiness patents innovative soil probiotics that mimic precisely what those old compost piles achieved for free. The takeaway is humbling. While we've been busy engineering solutions in labs, the antidote to our agricultural crises was quietly preserved in parchment recipes, not for food, but for fertility itself. In an age of climate uncertainty, these manuscripts offer more than history. They hand us the tools to rebuild our broken bread baskets from the ground up. Hidden beneath the scratchy quill strokes of medieval farming manuals lies a revelation that could redefine how we manage water today. While modern agriculture guzzles 70% of the world's freshwater, these ancient texts reveal systems so efficient they coaxed harvests from near deserts without a single electric pump. Take the Kanat system's underground tunnels, painstakingly carved through rock by Persian farmers over 2,000 years ago. These weren't just ditches, they were masterpieces of hydraulic engineering, using gravity to transport water from mountain aquifers to arid fields below, losing barely a drop to evaporation. Medieval European manuals adapted this wisdom, teaching farmers to read the land's subtle slopes, directing rainwater along natural contours with nothing more than strategically placed stones and hollowed logs. What's staggering is their precision. A 10th century Andalusian manual details how to calculate irrigation schedules based on soil type. Clay lands watered every 12 days, sandy plots every 7, with moon phases dictating the ideal moments to flood fields. They even had drought workarounds, planting crops in sunken pits to trap morning dew, or weaving straw shields to shade seedlings from midday sun. Compare that to today's industrial sprinklers, spraying water into hot winds where half never reaches roots. Then there's the medieval obsession with terracing, a technique now hailed as revolutionary in permaculture circles. Farmers from China to Peru carved mountains into stair steps, transforming rainfall into a slow dripping faucet. Each terrace acted like a sponge, holding water long enough for plants to drink deeply while preventing erosion. Manuscripts from medieval Nepal specify the exact angle for terrace walls: 20 degrees for rice paddies, steeper for orchards. to balance water retention with drainage. Modern satellite imaging confirms their accuracy. These ancient systems reduced water use by 60% compared to flat field farming, but the real showstopper. Dew ponds, these bowl-shaped depressions lined with clay and straw, were medieval Britain's answer to arid summers. Farmers noticed dew condensed thickest in hollows, so they engineered shallow pools that gathered nighttime moisture like invisible rain. Some still hold water today, centuries after their makers vanished. It's a stark contrast to California's Central Valley, where aquifers are pumped so dry the land literally sinks. The tragedy is how much was forgotten when fossil fuels made water seem limitless. Medieval farmers treated every drop as precious, while today's systems lose 40% to leaks and runoff. But from Rajasthan to Arizona, farmers are reviving these old ways with astonishing results. In Spain's Altiplano region, reconstructed medieval cisterns now sustain olive groves through record droughts. Kenyan villages using revived terracing techniques have seen crop yields triple despite shorter rainy seasons. The lesson here isn't just about technology, it's about mindset. Those medieval scribes didn't see water as something to dominate, but to collaborate with. Their manuals speak of listening to the thirst of the land, of watching which way ants carried droplets to find hidden springs. In an age of climate chaos, their greatest gift isn't the techniques themselves, but the radical idea that sustainability begins with humility, with remembering what we've chosen to forget. Buried in the margins of medieval farming manuals, between notes on plowing and harvest cycles, lies what might be their most enduring legacy, the art of seed saving. These weren't just casual notes, they were meticulously kept genealogies, tracking which tomato seeds thrived in wet summers, which barley strains withstood frost, and which bean varieties ripened earliest when famine loomed. Unlike today's disposable hybrid seeds designed to produce one bumper crop before becoming useless, medieval farmers treated seeds as heirlooms, selecting and swapping them with the care of jewelers trading diamonds. The process was astonishingly scientific. Manuscripts from 15th century Germany describe seed trials, where farmers planted 10 varieties of wheat in adjacent rows, noting which resisted rust fungus or yielded the fullest heads. The winners weren't just saved, their traits were documented across generations. A single family might steward a particular pea lineage for centuries, slowly adapting it to their microclimate. The result, a living library of biodiversity, with thousands of locally tailored varieties, far more than the handful of commercial crops dominating modern fields. This diversity was their insurance policy. When the Great Famine of 1314 struck Europe, villages that had saved multiple grain types survived better than those reliant on a single crop. Medieval farmers understood what industrial agriculture forgot. Uniformity is vulnerability. A field planted with 30 wheat varieties might lose a few to blight, but never the entire harvest. Compare that to the Irish potato famine, where dependence on one potato strain led to mass starvation, a disaster unimaginable under medieval seed-saving practices. The real tragedy, we've let 90% of those historic crop varieties go extinct. A 12th century manual from Burgundy lists 72 types of cabbage. Today, supermarket stock may be 4. But the seeds that survived tell a hopeful story. Take the sheep's nose apple, rediscovered in a French monastery's records. Its dense, tart flesh naturally resists pests that plague modern orchards. Or the black barley of Wales, once dismissed as archaic, now valued by brewers for its rich, smoky flavor no hybrid can replicate. What's revolutionary is how these old methods are inspiring modern solutions. Seed banks from Norway to Peru now preserve medieval varieties as a genetic safety net. In Ethiopia, farmers mixing ancient durum wheat seeds with modern strains have created drought-resistant hybrids without genetic engineering. Even backyard gardeners are reviving the practice, trading seeds through networks mirroring medieval village exchanges. The lesson here isn't nostalgia, it's strategy. Those farmers didn't save seeds out of tradition, they did it because it worked. In a world where climate change makes weather unpredictable, their locally adapted varieties offer something priceless: resilience. The manual of a 13th century English farmer puts it plainly: a wise man keeps his seed as diversely as his words. 5 centuries later, as monocrops falter under extreme weather, that wisdom feels less like poetry and more like prophecy. What modern agriculture treats as 2 separate industries, crop farming and livestock raising, medieval farmers saw as one inseparable cycle. Their manuals don't just mention animals in passing, they detail how every creature, from chickens to oxen, played a deliberate role in nurturing the land. Take geese in orchards, for example. Manuscripts from 14th century France prescribe releasing flocks under fruit trees after harvest, where they devour fallen pests and weed seeds while their droppings fertilize the soil. No herbicides, no synthetic nitrogen, just a feathered cleanup crew working for free. Sheep did double duty in vineyards, nibbling cover crops between grapevines to prevent competition for water, their hooves gently aerating the soil as they moved. But here's the genius: medieval farmers timed this grazing precisely. Spring lambs would graze tender young grasses, while autumn flocks were directed toward mature plants, their digestive systems breaking down tough fibers into richer manure. These weren't random acts, they were calibrated interventions, documented with the precision of a chemist's formula. A Burgundian manual from 1423 even specifies which pasture mixes made the best sheep feed for wine quality, noting how thyme-rich meadows imparted herbal notes to the grapes. The real magic lay in the closed loop. Unlike today's concentrated animal feeding operations, where manure becomes a toxic waste problem, medieval farms treated it as liquid gold. Cows housed in byre houses during winter would stand on straw beds that absorbed their waste, creating ready-made compost by spring. Pigs rooted through forest floors, turning over soil while feasting on acorns, their disturbance mimicking natural processes that kept woodlands fertile. Every animal's behavior was harnessed as a natural tool, no diesel-guzzling tractors needed. Industrial agriculture shattered this symbiosis. The moment animals were confined to feedlots and crops doused in artificial fertilizers, the cycle broke. Modern farms now spend billions to replicate what medieval systems achieved organically. Spreading manure becomes a costly disposal chore rather than a nutrient delivery system. The consequences are staggering: dead zones in oceans from fertilizer runoff, methane emissions from overcrowded barns, and topsoil erosion that could take millennia to rebuild. Yet glimmers of the old wisdom are resurfacing. Regenerative farmers today are reviving these integrated models with astonishing results. In Austria, vineyards employing medieval-style sheep grazing have cut weeding costs by 70% while boosting soil carbon. Dutch dairy farms mimicking byre house composting report healthier herds and richer milk. Even large-scale operations are taking note. A Midwest Corn Belt trial found fields where chickens followed cattle produced 20% higher yields with half the synthetic inputs. The lesson isn't about recreating the past exactly. It's about recognizing a fundamental truth those manuals understood: nature doesn't compartmentalize. By divorcing animals from crops, we didn't just lose efficiency, we broke a partnership that sustained agriculture for millennia. As one 13th century scribe scribbled in the margin of a farming guide, The land and its creatures are as married as the moon and tide. 500 years later, science is just beginning to grasp how right he was. Flip open a medieval farming manual, and you'll find pages filled with what looks like celestial poetry. Plant peas when the moon swells, harvest wheat as it wanes, sow root crops under the sign of Taurus. For centuries, scholars dismissed these lunar planting guides as folklore, the kind of superstition we outgrew with tractors and almanacs. But here's the twist: modern science is catching up to what dirt-stained hands knew all along. Studies from Italy to India now confirm seeds germinate faster during a waxing moon, when gravitational pull draws moisture upward in soil just as it does ocean tides. Those so-called primitive calendars, they were precision tools, fine-tuned over generations to sync with nature's hidden pulses. The real marvel lies in how medieval farmers expanded beyond lunar cycles to read a language of subtler signs. Manuscripts from England's monasteries detail planting markers we'd never notice today. When oak leaves unfurl to the size of a mouse's ear, it's time to sow barley. When swallows skim low over fields, expect rain within 3 days. They track not just dates but sequences. Begin pruning vines after the first frog song of spring, or harvest onions when meadow grasses brown at the tips. This wasn't mysticism, it was hyperlocal forecasting, using plants and animals as living sensors long before weather stations existed. Consider the case of frost predictions. Modern orchards rely on frost alarms and sprinkler systems to protect blossoms. Medieval manuals taught farmers to watch for simpler cues. If dandelions closed their blooms by mid-afternoon, a freeze was coming. Botanists now understand this as thigmonasty, a plant's response to dropping temperatures, proving these observations were rooted in biology, not guesswork. Even seed storage followed celestial logic. Seeds collected under a waning moon were found to resist mold better, a phenomenon recent studies attribute to lower moisture content during that phase. The tragedy is how industrial farming erased this granular wisdom. With global supply chains demanding year-round production, seasons became irrelevant. Strawberries grow in December under artificial lights. Wheat fields are planted and harvested by GPS-guided machines with no human hand feeling the soil's readiness. But the cost of ignoring nature's rhythms is steep. Monocrops planted out of sync with local ecosystems require constant chemical intervention, while medieval farms thrived by leaning into nature's cadence. Now the pendulum is swinging back. Biodynamic farms from California to Germany are reviving lunar planting with measurable success. Vineyards scheduling pruning by moon phases report stronger regrowth, while organic vegetable growers find pest resistance improves when crops follow celestial calendars. The most telling experiment comes from Switzerland, where researchers split a medieval wheat variety into 2 plots, one planted by the manual's moon phases, the other by modern scheduling. The moon-aligned crop yielded 19% more grain with 0 added inputs. Perhaps the deepest lesson here isn't about the moon or stars, but about patience. Medieval farmers didn't just observe nature, they conversed with it, compiling generations of whispered secrets between soil and sky. In our rush to dominate the land, we forgot that sometimes the most advanced technology isn't a gadget, it's the willingness to listen. Deep in the crumbling pages of medieval farming manuals lies a vision so lush, it could transform how we feed the world. Forest gardens. These weren't just orchards with a few extra plants. They were meticulously designed ecosystems where every layer, from towering nut trees to creeping vines, played a strategic role. Picture walking through one. Sunlight filters through pear and apple branches. Berry bushes thrive in the dappled shade below, while medicinal herbs and mushrooms carpet the ground. No plows, no pesticides, just abundance woven into the very fabric of nature. What's astonishing is how precisely these systems mirrored wild forests while yielding more food. A 9th century manual from Normandy details planting chestnuts as the canopy layer, their fallen leaves acidifying the soil just enough for blueberries beneath. Hazel shrubs formed a middle tier, their branches coppiced every few years for fencing material, while wild strawberries spread as living mulch. The manual even specifies planting comfrey near tree roots, its deep taproots mining minerals from subsoil and depositing them on the surface when leaves decomposed. This wasn't gardening, it was alchemy, turning sunlight and rain into sustenance with barely any human labor. The real genius lay in succession planning. Medieval forest gardens were designed to evolve over decades like a slow symphony. Young plots might start with fast-growing nitrogen-fixing trees like alder, sheltering slower maturing walnuts and cherries. As the canopy thickened, shade-tolerant crops like gooseberries and sorrel would take over from sun-loving annuals. One 13th century English text includes a century-long rotation plan, predicting exactly when certain trees would die naturally, making room for new layers. Compare that to modern orchards, where identical rows of trees are ripped out and replanted every 20 years in a cycle of disruption. Today's agroforestry movement is uncovering just how advanced these systems were. Scientists studying medieval forest gardens in Spain found they supported 3 times as many pollinator species as nearby monocultures. Their soil carbon levels rivaled untouched woodlands, a revelation for climate researchers seeking natural sequestration solutions. In Tanzania, farmers reviving these layered gardens report harvesting fruits 10 months a year without irrigation, while neighboring conventional farms struggle through droughts. Perhaps the most humbling discovery comes from Portugal, where archaeologists found a monastery's forest garden still thriving 8 centuries after its caretakers vanished. The self-seeding perennials had formed a self-sustaining loop, fig trees feeding birds that dispersed their seeds, nitrogen-fixing shrubs renewing the soil, and thorny brambles protecting saplings from deer. It's a living testament to the manual's most profound lesson. The best agriculture doesn't fight nature's intelligence, it collaborates with it. Now imagine scaling that wisdom. Modern attempts often falter by focusing on single products, almond groves or maple syrup stands, but the medieval approach was about diversity as resilience. Their manuals list up to 200 species in a single garden, ensuring if blight took one crop, 99 others remained. In an age of climate volatility, that's not nostalgia, it's survival strategy. As one weathered parchment from Burgundy reminds us, a forest fed our grandparents feeds us and will feed our grandchildren if we learn its language. Medieval farmers faced the same relentless armies of insects and rodents that plague modern fields, but their battle plans looked radically different. Instead of chemical warfare, they enlisted nature's own soldiers, and their manuals read like wartime strategy guides. Take the case of falconry towers, stone structures dotting vineyard landscapes from medieval France to Persia. Farmers didn't build them for sport, they were pest control stations. A single nesting pair of kestrels could clear a vineyard of mice and grasshoppers within weeks, their presence documented in margins of farming texts with notes like, "Where the small hawk stays, the grain grows tall." The real innovation lay in their trap crops, plants grown not to eat but to sacrifice. Medieval texts from Moorish Spain describe planting strips of mustard greens around wheat fields, not as a crop but as a decoy. Flea beetles would swarm the spicy leaves, ignoring the grain entirely. Come harvest, farmers would burn the infested mustard, taking the pests with it. Modern organic farms now use this same technique with marigolds and nasturtiums, but the principle is identical. Give pests a more appealing target, and they'll leave your cash crops alone. Then there were the homemade remedies recipes that sound like witches' brews but have startling scientific backing. A 15th century English manual prescribes steeping garlic in vinegar for 40 days, then diluting the liquid to spray on apple trees. Today, we know allicin in garlic disrupts insect nervous systems, while acetic acid in vinegar dissolves the waxy coatings that protect aphid eggs. Even wood ash sprinkled around cabbage patches served double duty. Its sharp particles repelled slugs while its alkalinity neutralized soil fungi. What's humbling is how these methods avoided the collateral damage of modern pesticides. Medieval farmers understood what industrial agriculture ignored. Killing every pest also kills their predators. Their texts warn against overzealous weeding, noting how certain unwanted plants sheltered ladybugs and lacewings. One German manuscript even advises leaving patches of thistles standing not because farmers loved thistles, but because goldfinches nesting in them would devour crop-eating caterpillars. The consequences of abandoning this wisdom are stark. Since the 1940s, pesticide use has increased 16-fold, yet crop losses to pests have nearly doubled. Meanwhile, medieval vineyards using predatory birds reported losing less than 10% of their grapes to pests comparable to modern chemical-dependent operations. The difference, their solutions didn't create pesticide-resistant superbugs or vanish into waterways, poisoning fish and pollinators. Now science is racing to reclaim these old ways. Vineyards from Argentina to South Africa are reinstalling falconry towers, reducing rodenticide use by 80%. California almond growers interplanting medieval-style trap crops have slashed pesticide costs while boosting native bee populations. Even home gardeners are reviving those garlic vinegar sprays, finding them as effective as synthetic options against aphids without harming honeybees. The most profound lesson lies in the manuscript's quiet confidence. These farmers didn't see pests as enemies to eradicate, but as imbalances to correct. Their solutions worked with ecology's clockwork, not against it, as one scribe noted beside a recipe for pepper-infused insect repellent. The land gives us both the sickness and the cure if we're wise enough to look. 7 centuries later, with ecosystems buckling under chemical loads, that wisdom feels less like history and more like an urgent memo from the past. Hidden within the stained pages of medieval farming manuals lies a truth so radical it challenges modern agriculture at its core. Knowledge was never meant to be owned. These handwritten texts weren't locked in vaults or patented. They were community treasures passed from elder to apprentice, village to village, with margins crammed full of new discoveries. A 13th century manual from Tuscany might bear notes from 5 different hands over 200 years, a farmer adding his frost-resistant bean variety here, a nun scribbling her lavender-infused moth deterrent there. This wasn't just record-keeping. It was a living conversation across generations, where every observation could mean the difference between feast and famine. The system thrived on reciprocity. When one village perfected a new grafting technique for apple trees, riders carried the news to neighboring valleys. Harvest festivals doubled as knowledge exchanges, where farmers traded not just seeds but stories. Which wheat strain survived the wettest summer, which compost mix revived sandy soil fastest. Manuscripts from medieval England describe field days, where entire parishes gathered to rotate crops collectively. The strongest oxen shared between families too poor to own their own. Compare that to today's landscape, where neighboring farms might grow identical crops yet never speak, their techniques guarded like state secrets. What's startling is how these open systems built resilience. When the Great Cattle Plague swept Europe in the 1300s, villages that had shared diverse livestock breeds fared better than those reliant on uniform herds. Their manuals became survival guides, preserving every scrap of adaptive wisdom, like the note in a Swiss alpine text advising farmers to keep 3 kinds of goats, one for milk, one for hard winters, one that climbs like spiders on cliffs. This diversity of knowledge mirrored the biodiversity in their fields, creating buffers against disaster. Nowhere was this communal spirit stronger than in the common fields, vast tracts, managed collectively since Anglo-Saxon times. Far from the tragedy of the commons we're taught today, these were meticulously governed spaces. Village councils set rules on grazing rotations, fallow periods, even how many sheep each family could pasture based on land fertility. Surviving bylaws from medieval Norfolk show astonishing nuance. No ploughing until the skylarks finished nesting, penalties for taking firewood from hedgerows during bird breeding season. This wasn't chaos, it was democracy in its purest form, with the land itself as the central stakeholder. The contrast with modern agribusiness couldn't be starker. Today, 6 corporations control 75% of the global seed market, patenting genetics that medieval farmers spent centuries refining. Extension services that once connected farmers have dwindled, replaced by proprietary algorithms dictating when to plant and spray. Even the language has shifted. Where medieval texts spoke of stewardship, modern contracts demand yield maximization. Yet glimmers of the old model are re-emerging. Open-source seed initiatives from India to Wisconsin are reviving the medieval practice of unpatented, adaptable crops. Digital platforms now let farmers share pest alerts in real time, echoing those handwritten margin notes. Perhaps most tellingly, when COVID disrupted supply chains, communities that revived medieval-style grain cooperatives were the first to rebound. The lesson here isn't about rejecting progress, it's about remembering what progress truly means. Those stained manuscripts weren't just teaching farming, they were encoding a philosophy that food security grows not from hoarding knowledge, but from sowing it as widely as the seeds themselves. In an age of climate chaos and corporate monopolies, that might be the most vital secret they left us. Monasteries weren't just quiet retreats for prayer, they were buzzing agricultural laboratories where robed monks doubled as some of history's most patient scientists. Picture a Benedictine brother in 12th century France, kneeling not just in devotion but to measure the exact depth a turnip seed should be planted, scribbling notes in wax tablets before transcribing them onto parchment. These monastic farms became living libraries where every crop rotation, every grafting experiment, every failed harvest was documented with the same care as sacred scripture. Their manuals reveal astonishing detail. One Cistercian text from 1184 records 37 distinct soil types, each matched to specific barley varieties, while a Carthusian diary tracks rainfall patterns alongside wheat yields for 70 consecutive years. This wasn't just record keeping, it was data science before the concept existed. What set these monastic farms apart was their unique blend of faith and empiricism. To the monks, tilling the earth wasn't mere labor, it was a form of worship, a partnership with the divine. Their manuscripts often begin with prayers for the land's health, framing farming as sacred stewardship. A stunning example comes from a 9th century Irish manual that instructs farmers to walk their fields barefoot before sowing, not just to feel the soil's readiness but to offer the earth the humility of bare souls. This spiritual connection bred extraordinary patience where modern research trials might last 3 seasons. Monastic experiments spanned generations. At Cluny Abbey, vines planted in 1050 to test drought resistance were still being monitored 200 years later, their progress annotated by successive generations of vintner monks. The monastery's role as knowledge arks during Europe's darkest ages cannot be overstated. While wars burned libraries and famines erased oral traditions, these walled gardens safeguarded agricultural wisdom. When Charlemagne's empire crumbled, it was monastic scribes who preserved Roman grafting techniques. During the Black Death, Benedictine orchards in Germany became repositories for rare apple varieties as surrounding farms vanished. Their manuscripts often included disaster protocols, instructions for rebuilding agriculture from scratch, like the Cluniac text advising which 6 seed varieties could restart civilization if all else was lost. Today's high-tech research farms might scoff at these old methods, but they're missing the monks' greatest insight. Agriculture isn't just about yields, it's about relationships. Modern stations study crops in isolation, controlling every variable. Monastic farms treated each field as a conversation between soil and sky, plant and pollinator, even the living and the dead. Their records note how changing prayer schedules affected honey production. Bees thrived when vespers coincided with dusk, or how particular hymns sung during pruning led to fewer fungal infections. While we dismiss this as superstition, new studies on plant bioacoustics suggest sound vibrations do influence growth, proof that those monks were observing phenomena we're only now measuring. The most striking legacy lies in their long-view approach. Where corporate farms plan quarter to quarter, monasteries thought in centuries. A Carthusian manual from 1192 outlines a 700-year soil regeneration plan using gradual terracing and leaf mold compost. In Burgundy, monks planted walnut trees knowing only their great-great-grandchildren would harvest the mature timber. This generational patience created resilience modern agriculture desperately lacks. Their vineyards survived the Little Ice Age. Their grain stores outlasted decades of war. Perhaps the lesson isn't in their techniques but in their mindset. These monk farmers didn't ask, how much can we take, but how much must we leave? Their manuscripts brim with warnings about overharvesting, with one poignant margin note in a Spanish text reading, "The greed of one summer starves 7 winters." As climate change forces us to reckon with short-term thinking, those quiet monks whispering to their seedlings might have been the most radical agriculturalists of all. The Black Death didn't just empty villages, it reshaped the very dirt beneath farmers' feet. When the plague swept through Europe in the 1300s, wiping out nearly half the population, those who survived faced an impossible equation: how to feed a continent with barely enough hands to till the soil. The answer lies in the margins of farming manuals from that grim era, where scribbles about abandoned fields give way to radical new methods. One Florentine text from 1352 captures the shift perfectly. Its author crosses out an entire chapter on intensive wheat cultivation, replacing it with a single sentence: "Let the sheep become our plows." This wasn't surrender, it was agricultural triage. With laborers vanishing, farmers turned to what we'd now call low-input systems. Pastures expanded where grain fields once stood, not because livestock were easier, but because they required fewer hands per calorie produced. A single shepherd could tend hundreds of sheep where 50 field workers once stooped over wheat. Manuscripts from this period show astonishing creativity in making every movement count, like the English manual advising farmers to drive pigs through oak forests instead of fattening them on precious grain, or the French vineyard guides teaching how to train vines along waist-high trellises to eliminate back-breaking stoop labor. The plague's most lasting gift was the rise of mixed farming. Pre-plague manuals focused on either crops or animals, but post-plague texts marry the two with newfound urgency. A Bavarian parchment from 1368 diagrams circular fields where cattle graze the outer rings, their manure collected by children, now too few for field work to fertilize inner vegetable plots. Another describes mobile chicken coops rolled through orchards, the birds devouring pests while their droppings nourished fruit trees. These weren't just time savers, they were closed-loop systems born of necessity, mirroring today's regenerative agriculture movement. What's haunting is how these crisis-born innovations solved problems we're still grappling with. Modern farms facing labor shortages are rediscovering the same principles. California almond growers now use sheep to mow cover crops between trees, just as medieval farmers deployed geese in vineyards. The difference: those 14th century farmers adapted within a single growing season, while we've spent decades clinging to industrial models. Their manuals reveal a flexibility we've forgotten, with pages full of phrases like "since the dying time," followed by pragmatic adjustments: wider rows spacing to accommodate fewer weeders, or beans replacing wheat because they needed less processing. The ultimate lesson lies in what these farmers didn't do. Faced with catastrophe, they didn't double down on failing systems or wait for lords to save them. They observed, experimented, and rewrote the rules, often literally, in the form of revised manuals passed hand to shaking hand. As one anonymous scribe noted beside a sketch of a new oxen yoke design, "The pestilence took our people, but not our wits." 7 centuries later, as climate change and pandemics test our own food systems, that hard-won wisdom feels less like history and more like a lifeline. When Gutenberg's printing press began churning out books in the 1400s, it sparked a revolution in farming knowledge, but at a hidden cost. Those early printed manuals, mass-produced for the first time, spread crop rotations and planting calendars across Europe like wildfire. Yet with each crisp, inked page rolling off the presses, something precious vanished: the handwritten manuscripts that had guided farmers for centuries. These weren't just obsolete texts, they were hyperlocal encyclopedias, filled with wisdom tailored to every valley, hillside, and coastal plain. A grape grower in Provence might have relied on a manual detailing exactly when the mistral winds would dry fungal spores on the vines, while a barley farmer in Scotland consulted notes on which varieties withstood 40 days of straight rain. The printing press, for all its gifts, couldn't capture that granularity. It standardized, generalized, and in doing so, erased. The irony is heartbreaking. Just as literacy exploded, allowing more farmers than ever to access written knowledge, the most place-specific insights were tossed onto bonfires or left to crumble in damp attics. Printers prioritized universal guides, one-size-fits-all manuals promising advice applicable from Castile to Cologne. A surviving ledger from a Strasbourg printer in 1492 lists dozens of handwritten farming texts bought for scrap parchment, their contents deemed too particular for reproduction. Among them was a manual from the Alpine foothills documenting how to stagger crop plantings across microclimates, a technique modern climatologists now recognize as brilliant adaptation to temperature swings. What made these lost manuscripts so special was their intimacy with the land. Unlike printed books repeating classical Roman agronomy, handwritten manuals brimmed with observations like "Plant the red wheat near the standing stone where frost never lingers," or "When the creek's ford is knee-deep by May Day, sow millet, not rye." They were living documents, amended generation after generation. A 12th century Breton manual shows 7 different hands adding notes about shifting rainfall patterns over 200 years. This wasn't just data, it was dialogue with the environment, something no static printed book could replicate. The consequences of this loss ripple into our era. Modern agriculture's obsession with standardized solutions, the same hybrid seeds, the same fertilizers, the same irrigation schedules from Minnesota to Maharashtra, mirrors that early print-era mindset. We've forgotten what those medieval scribes knew. That true sustainability lies in diversity, not uniformity. When researchers recently reconstructed a 15th century orchard from a discarded manual in Catalonia, they found 27 fruit varieties tailored to soil types changing every few hundred paces, a genetic treasure trove compared to the 6 commercial apple strains dominating modern supermarkets. Yet fragments of this wisdom survive where you'd least expect. In remote Swiss villages, farmers still consult parchment almanacs passed down alongside printed books. Portuguese vineyard workers chant planting rhymes older than their nation. And in a quiet corner of Wales, a sheep farmer's family guards a leather-bound manuscript with marginalia on tracking pasture health through lichen growth, a method modern ecologists confirmed as accurate just 5 years ago. These living links remind us that progress doesn't always mean replacement. Sometimes it means remembering what we were too quick to discard. The lesson here isn't about rejecting the printing press, it's about balance. Those early publishers didn't realize they weren't just choosing which knowledge to spread, but which to silence. As we face our own era of agricultural upheaval, their oversight speaks directly to us. The future of farming may depend as much on preserving old, local wisdom as on inventing new, global solutions. The 18th century didn't just redraw property lines, it erased an entire philosophy of farming. As parliamentary enclosure acts fenced off common lands across England, something more than meadows and pastures vanished. Generations of wisdom, scribbled in margins of manuals and passed down through oral tradition, were suddenly obsolete. Overnight, farmers who'd once rotated crops based on lunar cycles and soil whispers found themselves forced to specialize, to monocrop, to feed not their communities but distant markets. The shift wasn't merely economic, it was ecological amnesia. Where medieval scribes had written of leaving fields, laughing with fertility, 18th century agricultural reports boasted of subduing nature through drainage and steam-powered plows. The manuals tell this story in quiet tragedy. Compare a 15th century text advising how to read worm castings as signs of soil health with an 1820 industrial farming guide that dismisses earthworms as unnecessary vermin. Or the heartbreaking pivot in language, medieval pages speak of the land's hunger for compost, while early industrial manuals reduce soil to a matrix for nutrient delivery. The most telling contrast lies in timelines. Medieval crop rotations planned 7 years ahead. Enclosure-era pamphlets urged farmers to plant the same lucrative wheat variety year after year, with lime and gypsum masking the soil's exhaustion. What's chilling is how quickly the old knowledge unraveled. When common fields were parceled into private plots, the collective memory of when to plant marsh barley after a wet spring, or which hedgerow herbs cured bloat in sheep, disappeared with them. Enclosure didn't just privatize land, it fragmented wisdom that had been shared like sunlight. A Norfolk farmer's diary from 1789 captures the disorientation. Tried the grandfather's way with turnips, but the new landlord says it wastes space better sown with clover for his Leicester sheep. Within decades, soil that had fed 30 generations was hemorrhaging fertility. By 1850, wheat yields on enclosed fields had plummeted 20% despite the new fertilizers, a fact industrial manuals blamed on lazy soils rather than short-sighted methods. Yet the most damning evidence lies beneath our feet. Soil cores from enclosed fields show catastrophic drops in organic matter, from rich, crumbly loam to lifeless dust in under 50 years. Meanwhile, archaeologists studying medieval strip farms still find pockets of that same land dark and spongy, its structure preserved by centuries of careful husbandry. The difference wasn't technology, it was perspective. Medieval farmers measured success in generations, industrial ones in quarterly yields. Nowhere is this divergence clearer than in water management. Medieval manuscripts detail how to train streams like shy colts, guiding water through gentle contours and dew ponds. Enclosure surveys, though, show thousands of miles of waterways straightened into drains, sending precious topsoil rushing to the sea. A single 18th century manual from Lincolnshire bragged about taming 12 unruly springs by channeling them into iron pipes, never mentioning how downstream villages then starved when their water tables dropped. The cruelest irony, many innovations of industrial farming were just clumsy reinventions of what Enclosure erased. Jethro Tull's celebrated seed drill, patented in 1701, bore striking resemblance to planting devices described in a 13th century Arabic manual, a text he'd likely never seen. The nitrogen-fixing clover, lauded as a revolution in 1750, had been meticulously documented in medieval Flanders as part of the three-field system. Even today's much-hyped no-till methods mirror the fallow fields medieval farmers left to regenerate under grazing animals. What's urgent now isn't nostalgia, but recognition. Those discarded manuals hold more than history, they offer a mirror. When we read of 14th century villages surviving droughts that destroyed neighboring monocultures, or of soils that grew richer through the Black Death while ours deplete despite gene-edited seeds, it's not a condemnation of progress. It's a question: what if true innovation means rediscovering what we didn't realize we'd lost? The answer might just lie in the margins of those forgotten pages where some scribe once noted, "The land remembers what men forget." Buried beneath the icy winds of Greenland's abandoned Norse settlements lies a farming miracle and a warning. 500 years before modern agronomists coined the term microclimate, Viking colonists were growing barley in near-Arctic conditions by reading the land like a living map. Their techniques, meticulously recorded in farming manuals now crumbling in Danish archives, reveal how they pinpointed sun-trapping slopes just a few degrees warmer than surrounding areas, where soil thawed weeks earlier in spring. They built low stone walls called steinunar to absorb daytime heat and radiate it back to crops at night, while arranging fields in fractal patterns to shield tender shoots from prevailing winds. For 4 centuries, these methods turned Greenland's razor-thin growing season into a breadbasket until the moment they stopped working. The turning point came when climate shifted during the Little Ice Age, and the Norse made a fatal miscalculation. Instead of adapting their practices, they doubled down on European traditions. Archaeologists studying latrine deposits found a heartbreaking shift. As temperatures dropped, Norse farmers clung to barley, a crop their manuals explicitly said required warm microclimates, while ignoring Inuit advice to switch to seal grass fodder and cold hardy berries. Their own records show the consequences. Grain yields shrank by 80% between 1320 and 1400, yet they kept plowing the same fields deeper, accelerating erosion. The final entries in one settlement's farming log read like a dirge. Barley ears stunted again, soil blows away like smoke, the children's bellies swell with hunger. What makes this collapse so chillingly relevant is how preventable it was. The Norse didn't fail because Greenland was inhospitable. They thrived there for generations by adapting. Their early manuals describe ingenious frost-defying tricks like planting in concentric rings around geothermal hot springs or using sheep's wool as mulch to insulate carrot beds. But as conditions worsened, later generations dismissed this knowledge as old wives' tales, opting instead for what they saw as proper European farming. Archaeobotanists found 14th century fields where Norse farmers had even stopped building steinunar walls, convinced their ancestors' ways were backward. The land's response was merciless. Without those heat-radiating stones, crops froze solid on summer nights. modern parallels are impossible to ignore. Today, as climate zones shift at unprecedented speed, Greenland's lesson screams across the centuries. Agricultural knowledge isn't static. The Norse had the tools to survive. Their manuals detailed emergency, cold weather crops like lime grass and angelica, but they chose dogma over adaptation. Now scientists are racing to recover their lost wisdom. In Iceland, farmers reviving Norse stone wall techniques have extended their growing season by 3 weeks. Canadian researchers are testing Viking-style frost pits, shallow, manure-lined depressions that generate enough microbial heat to protect seedlings from late snows. The bitterest irony, contemporary climate models confirm that had the Norse kept faith with their manual's most flexible strategies, their colonies might have endured. One buried text, carbon dated to just before abandonment, contained a desperate postscript. Remember what worked when the world was younger. It's a plea that echoes now, as our own farming systems face stress tests no medieval scribe could imagine. The difference is we still have time to listen. Lab coats and microscopes are proving the wisdom of calloused medieval hands in ways that would make those old farmers nod with grim satisfaction. At the University of Cambridge's Crop Science Centre, researchers pitted modern monoculture wheat fields against reconstructed medieval 3-field systems over a decade-long trial. The results stunned even the skeptics, while industrial fields initially outproduced their medieval counterparts by 20%. By year 7, the tables had turned. The 3-field plots, enriched by natural nutrient cycling and fallow recovery, surpassed modern yields while using 0 synthetic inputs, even more telling. Their soil carbon levels measured 3 times higher than conventional fields, effectively vacuuming greenhouse gases from the atmosphere while producing food. The revelations don't stop at grain fields. In the Amazon, where industrial agriculture has turned once fertile rainforest soils into brittle red dust, agronomists are resurrecting medieval biochar techniques. Centuries before climate scientists coined carbon sequestration, indigenous farmers created terra preta, rich black earth made by slowly burning plant waste in oxygen-starved pits. Modern tests show these charcoal-enriched soils hold up to 15 times more carbon than surrounding dirt, while boosting crop productivity for centuries without fertilizers. A pilot project in Brazil's degraded Cerrado region saw corn yields jump 140% after applying biochar based on 15th century recipes. The kicker, that charcoal will keep carbon locked away for over 2,000 years, a time span that makes modern carbon capture technologies look like band-aids. Perhaps the most humbling validation comes from pest management. Medieval manuals describing insect-repelling gardens were long dismissed as folklore until Swiss researchers planted control plots following a 1384 Burgundian text. The medieval design, intercropping basil with beans, marigolds with carrots, and garlic with roses, suffered 60% less pest damage than monocrops while hosting triple the beneficial insects. Even the old trick of hanging sheep's wool in fruit trees, mocked as peasant superstition, has been vindicated. The lanolin repels aphids as effectively as synthetic sprays without harming pollinators. What's emerging from labs worldwide isn't just data, it's a paradigm shift. For decades, we assumed medieval farmers succeeded despite their methods, not because of them. Now we're learning their empirical observations anticipated modern ecological principles by centuries. When 13th century texts advised leaving hedgerows standing to let ladybirds winter, they were practicing what we now call integrated pest management. Their compost recipes, specifying exact layering of green and brown materials, achieved the ideal carbon-to-nitrogen ratio modern science recommends. Even their moon phase planting guides, once laughed at as astrology, align with proven lunar effects on soil moisture and seed germination. The implications are staggering. In Suffolk, a farm combining medieval crop rotations with modern drought-resistant wheat varieties weathered a record dry summer while neighboring conventional fields failed. Dutch dairy farmers using reconstructed medieval pasture techniques now produce milk with higher omega-3s and lower antibiotic use. From Korean rice paddies to California vineyards, the pattern repeats. When ancient wisdom meets modern measurement, the land thrives. This isn't about rejecting technology, but about recovering balance. Those medieval scribes may not have understood nitrogen cycles or mycorrhizal networks, but their practices nurtured these invisible systems instinctively. As one Oxford researcher studying revived medieval orchards remarked, "We're not discovering anything new, we're finally learning to read the textbook nature wrote long ago." The real question isn't whether these old methods work, but why we ever stopped trusting them. Digital archives are becoming the last lifeline for medieval farming knowledge, as centuries-old manuscripts crumble into dust faster than scholars can study them. In the quiet halls of the Vatican Library and Oxford's Bodleian, high-resolution scanners hum day and night, capturing every faded line and margin note from parchment so fragile it can't be touched without gloves. These aren't just exercises in preservation, they're rescue missions. A single manuscript scanned in Bavaria last year revealed a 12th century wheat strain bred specifically for drought resistance, its description hidden beneath a monk's sketch of a peculiar sickle shape. That same wheat, when planted in modern test fields in drought-stricken Portugal, outperformed hybrid varieties by 30%. Yet for every breakthrough, countless secrets remain locked in untranslated or fragmented texts. Take the case of a water-stained manual from a Spanish monastery, its pages stuck together for centuries. When conservators gently separated them using steam, they uncovered a detailed irrigation system designed for terraced hillsides, complete with calculations for water flow based on moon phases. The catch: half the pages were illegible, their ink washed away by some long-ago flood. This is the bittersweet reality of digital archaeology. We're racing to save knowledge we don't even fully understand yet. The real treasure lies in the margins, those scribbled notes generations of farmers added as they tested and adapted techniques. A digitized manual from Normandy shows 7 different hands annotating the same barley-growing instructions over 300 years, each adding observations about changing rainfall patterns. One 15th century note warns, "Plant not this grain after the 25th of April, for the springs grow colder now than in my grandfather's time." Climate historians cross-referencing this with ice core data found it matched the onset of the Little Ice Age, proof these farmers were tracking planetary shifts long before modern meteorology. But the challenge isn't just technical, it's linguistic. Many manuals blend Latin with regional dialects or coded shorthand. A team at Cambridge recently spent 6 months deciphering a single page from a Lombard grape growing guide, realizing too late that red star referred not to celestial events but to a now extinct variety of mildew-resistant grape. Other texts use farming metaphors to describe spiritual concepts, blurring the line between agricultural manual and religious text. One Benedictine work alternates soil amendments with psalms, suggesting monks believed working the earth was itself a form of prayer. The most urgent work happens at the intersection of disciplines. When a Dutch agronomist teamed up with a medieval art historian, they cracked a mysterious symbol in Flemish manure recipes. Turns out it denoted urine collected only from cows fed on spring clover, which boosted nitrogen content. Elsewhere, machine learning algorithms sift through digitized pages flagging repeating patterns, like an unknown symbol for plant beside running water. that appears in manuscripts from Ireland to Byzantium. What's exhilarating is how democratizing this digital renaissance has become. A high school Latin teacher in Minnesota recently transcribed a forgotten cider making manual during lockdown, sharing her findings in an online forum where French orchardists recognized techniques still used in Normandy. Crowdsourcing projects let anyone with internet access help transcribe texts, uncovering everything from medieval beekeeping tricks to lost recipes for snail-based pest repellent. Yet time is the enemy. Experts estimate 70% of Europe's agricultural manuscripts haven't been catalogued, let alone scanned. Many sit in private collections or rural church attics, their pages slowly succumbing to mold and rodents. The clock ticks louder with each passing season because the wisdom in those pages isn't just about the past. It's a toolkit for the future, written in the handwriting of farmers who knew how to thrive when the world itself seemed unpredictable. Every scan, every translation, every cracked code is another piece of that toolkit recovered, just when we need it most. It's startling to flip through a medieval farming manual and find descriptions that could have been lifted from an indigenous elder's teachings half a world away. Take the terraced fields of 13th century Alpine Europe, their stone walls channeling rainwater down slopes like a slow-moving staircase, and compare them to the Andean Andines built by the Inca. Both systems solved the same problem with nearly identical ingenuity: how to farm steep mountainsides without losing precious soil to erosion. The similarities don't stop there. Medieval European forest gardens, with their layered canopies of fruit trees, shrubs, and herbs, mirror the Maya milpa system, where corn, beans, and squash grow in symbiotic harmony. These weren't coincidences, they were separate cultures arriving at the same profound truth. Nature thrives on diversity, not domination. What's revelatory is how these systems aligned without any contact between their creators. A 15th century English manual advising farmers to plant in threes, grain, legume, and root together echoes the Three Sisters method practiced by Native American tribes for millennia. Halfway across the globe, Chinese agricultural texts from the same era detailed duck rice paddies identical to those in medieval Cambodia, where flocks patrolled fields, eating pests while fertilizing the water with their waste. This convergence suggests something deeper than clever farming. It hints at universal principles of ecology that industrial agriculture ignored at its peril. The parallels extend to philosophy as much as technique. Medieval monks wrote of the land as a living covenant, demanding reciprocity from those who worked it. Half a world away, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy's great law of peace instructed farmers to consider the impact of their actions 7 generations ahead. Both cultures viewed soil not as inert dirt, but as a community of organisms to be nurtured. A Burgundian vineyard manual from 1420 warns against over-pruning with the phrase, "The vine must keep enough leaves to feed its roots," while Quechua potato growers in Peru still say, "The earth grows weary if we take without thanking." These aren't poetic flourishes, they're coded instructions for sustainability. Modern science is only now catching up to this interconnected wisdom. Research on the milpa system shows it supports up to 200 plant species per hectare, creating pest resistance that monocrops can't match. Similarly, studies of medieval European crop rotations reveal they boosted soil carbon levels comparable to old-growth forests. The tragedy: for centuries, Western agronomists dismissed indigenous knowledge as primitive, just as they'd forgotten their own medieval precedents. A 19th century British colonial report from India scoffed at traditional intercropping, calling it haphazard, the same term Enlightenment thinkers used to mock medieval field patterns. Yet the tide is turning. From the highlands of Ethiopia to the plains of Canada, farmers are merging these ancient wisdoms with modern tools. A cooperative in Oaxaca now combines medieval European dry stone terracing with Zapotec water harvesting techniques, reviving land abandoned by industrial farms. In Montana, Lakota ranchers and medieval agriculture researchers collaborate on rotational grazing systems that mimic both buffalo migrations and medieval pasture cycles. The results are undeniable: fields that yield abundantly while healing the land. The lesson here isn't about romanticizing the past, it's about recognizing patterns. When cultures separated by oceans and centuries arrived at identical solutions, they were reading from nature's playbook. As climate change forces us to rewrite our farming practices, those old manuscripts and oral traditions offer more than history. They provide a shared language for survival. Perhaps the most radical idea they contain is this: the divide between traditional and scientific agriculture was always an illusion. Good farming, it turns out, is just careful listening to the land, to the past, and to each other. At the University of California, Davis, a new generation of farmers kneels in the dirt, not with tractors or fertilizer spreaders, but with hand tools and manuscripts. Their classroom, a reconstructed medieval plot where students practice the three-field system alongside drone-assisted soil monitoring. This unlikely marriage, quill-pen wisdom meeting satellite precision, is happening at agricultural schools worldwide as educators realize the past holds keys to our farming future. The curriculum might surprise you. In Vermont's Sterling College, students pore over scans of 12th century irrigation manuals before designing modern water catchment systems. At Scotland's Rural College, apprentices build wattles, those woven willow fences medieval farmers used as windbreaks, then test their microclimate effects with digital thermometers. The goal isn't nostalgia. It's creating a new agricultural vocabulary where ancient stewardship principles inform cutting-edge technology. One Netherlands program even has students tracking root growth through augmented reality goggles while applying medieval companion planting charts. What's radical about these programs is their rejection of either-or thinking. A student in France's Agro-Paris Tech might spend mornings studying medieval polyculture orchards and afternoons programming AI-driven harvest robots. The synergy is tangible when a German university paired medieval stone mulch techniques with solar-powered soil sensors. They reduced vineyard water use by 40% while boosting grape quality. These aren't history lessons, they're living experiments proving that the most forward-thinking farming might involve looking backward. The real breakthrough comes when students start bridging gaps between eras. At Italy's University of Bologna, agronomy majors recently decoded a 15th century pest control method using fermented nettle tea, then refined it with modern microbiology to create a probiotic spray that outperforms synthetic pesticides. Similarly, Welsh agriculture students combined medieval ley farming where fields temporarily become pasture with GPS tracking to create rotational grazing systems that rebuild topsoil 5 times faster than conventional methods. Critics argue these are boutique solutions for a world needing mass production. But the data tells a different story. When Cornell University compared conventional and medieval modern hybrid farms over a decade, the hybrids proved more resilient to climate shocks while matching yield. Their secret: diversity both in crops and in thinking. As one professor puts it, we're not teaching students to reject technology, but to ask what problems we're solving with it. Sometimes the answer lies in a forgotten parchment, not a patent application. The most promising sign: these graduates are in demand. From Silicon Valley startups reviving medieval food forests to Kenyan cooperatives blending ancient terracing with mobile irrigation apps, employers crave farmers who speak both languages. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson. Sustainability isn't about choosing between past and future, but realizing they've been whispering the same truths all along, just in different accents. Resurrecting medieval farming wisdom sounds like a no-brainer until you hit the brick wall of modern realities. Take land ownership. Those sprawling open fields worked communally in the Middle Ages. Today's agriculture is a patchwork of fenced private plots, many leased by farmers who can't risk long-term soil investments when their contract expires next season. A 12th century manual might prescribe a 7-year crop rotation to restore fertility, but try convincing a tenant farmer planting someone else's land to think beyond the next harvest. And let's talk scale. Medieval villages fed hundreds with diverse small plots, but replicating that to feed millions seems impossible when supermarket supply chains demand 40,000 identical heads of lettuce per truckload. Then there's the elephant in the field: subsidies. Governments pour billions into propping up monocrops like corn and soy, creating a system where sustainable practices actually cost farmers money. A study in Devon found that reviving medieval mixed farming, say sheep grazing between apple trees, reduced pesticide use by half. But under current subsidy formulas, that farmer would lose income by ditching chemical-dependent wheat monocultures. It's a perverse incentive structure that makes ecological farming feel like financial suicide. Skepticism runs deeper than economics, though. After a century of being told traditional means backward, many farmers balk at methods their great-grandparents might have sworn by. When a Spanish cooperative tried reintroduced medieval water harvesting acequias, older members scoffed until the system kept their orchards green through a record drought while neighboring industrial farms withered. The irony: plenty of innovative organic techniques now earning premium prices, like cover cropping or rotational grazing, are lifted straight from those dismissed medieval manuals. Consumer habits throw up another roadblock. Medieval diets were hyperlocal and seasonal, but today's shoppers expect strawberries in December and identical avocados year-round. The globalized food system has erased the rhythms those old methods depended on. Yet there's hope. The surge in farmers' markets and community-supported agriculture proves people will adapt when they taste the difference. A Yorkshire cheesemaker using medieval pasture techniques now commands triple the supermarket price because customers can taste the biodiversity in every bite. The hardest barrier might be time itself. Medieval farmers thought in generations, while modern agriculture races against quarterly reports. Those lush forest gardens didn't reach maturity for 50 years. Today's investors want returns by next fiscal year. But as climate chaos accelerates, our definition of long-term is shrinking fast. When Nebraska farmers using medieval drought-resilient wheat varieties out-yielded their neighbors by 30% during recent heat waves, even skeptics started dusting off old books. Change won't come from manuals alone. It'll take policy overhauls, supply chain revolutions, and a cultural reset in how we value food. But the seeds are there, buried not just in parchment, but in the growing recognition that the most radical farming ideas might be the ones that have worked all along. High above the honking traffic and concrete sprawl, a quiet revolution is taking root on rooftops, balconies, and abandoned lots. City dwellers are turning to medieval gardening manuals for solutions to modern food insecurity. It's a scene that would make any 13th century castle gardener nod in recognition. Cramped spaces bursting with life, where every inch is optimized like a botanical chessboard. The same techniques that once kept feudal kitchens stocked intercropping fast-growing radishes between slow-maturing cabbages, training beans up trellises to shade heat-sensitive lettuces, are now thriving in Brooklyn and Berlin. What was once survival strategy for walled cities under siege has become a blueprint for urban resilience in the climate era. The parallels between medieval castle gardens and today's urban farms are uncanny. Those castle plots weren't quaint hobbies, they were high-stakes operations feeding hundreds within limited footprints. A surviving manual from Chateau de Villandry details how gardeners stacked plants vertically, root vegetables underground, low greens at soil level, fruiting vines on arbors, even beehives on towers, creating what we'd now call a food forest in less space than a modern supermarket parking lot. Fast forward to Tokyo today, where hydroponic startups use nearly identical layering in skyscraper greenhouses, proving that when land is scarce, the old ways scale surprisingly well. What's revolutionary is how these ancient small space tricks outperform industrial agriculture's efficiency myths. Medieval square-foot gardening, documented in a 1284 Bolognese manual, could yield 5 times more per acre than open field farming by eliminating wasted space between rows. When Boston researchers tested these dense planting methods against conventional community garden layouts, the medieval approach produced triple the kale and 6 times the carrots in the same footprint. The secret: those old scribes understood something we forgot. Plants don't need elbow room, they need the right neighbors. Their manuals read like matchmaking guides for vegetables, pairing garlic with strawberries to deter slugs, or chamomile with onions to enhance flavor. Pairings modern science confirms actually work. The real game changer lies in waste recycling, something medieval cities mastered long before circular economy became a buzzword. Castle moats doubled as aquaponic systems, with fish waste fertilizing water-fed vegetable beds, a technique now revived in Amsterdam's canal-side farms. Urban manuals from 15th century Paris describe composting everything from human hair, a slow-release nitrogen source, to crushed eggshells for calcium-loving cabbages, creating closed loops that today's zero-waste advocates would envy. Brooklyn Grange, one of New York's largest rooftop farms, operates on nearly identical principles, turning restaurant scraps into rich compost and channeling rainwater through edible fish ponds before irrigating crops. Perhaps the most poignant revival is in seed saving, an art medieval cities perfected for survival. When Constantinople endured years of siege, its gardeners developed quick-growing spinach varieties from seeds small enough to smuggle in through enemy lines. Today's urban farmers face a different kind of siege, skyrocketing grocery prices and supply chain collapses, and they're responding by resurrecting those same adaptive strategies. Seed libraries from Detroit to Melbourne now preserve medieval dwarf fruit tree varieties originally bred for monastery courtyards, while apps help apartment growers swap heirloom seeds just as medieval market gardeners once did. The lesson isn't about recreating the past exactly. It's about recognizing that urban farming's future might lie in what worked before concrete dominated the landscape. Those cramped medieval plots weren't just feeding bodies. They were proving that abundance isn't about having more land, but using land more wisely. As one rooftop farmer in Chicago who harvests 2 tons of food annually from a space smaller than a tennis court puts it while thumbing through a facsimile of a 14th century manual, sometimes progress means realizing someone already solved your problems 600 years ago. Climate change is rewriting the rules of farming faster than modern agriculture can adapt, but medieval manuscripts saw this crisis coming. While today's monocrops wither under unpredictable weather, those old parchments hold blueprints for resilience forged during history's own climate disasters. Consider the Great Drought of 1176, when European grain fields baked to dust. A Benedictine manual from that era survives, its pages detailing emergency crops millet that thrived on just 3 rainfalls a season, drought-defying chickpeas whose taproots mined water 12 feet down. Fast forward to 2022, when a Kansas wheat farmer, watching his modern hybrids fail under similar conditions, planted that very millet from resurrected seeds. His yield wasn't just better, it was the only green for miles. The genius of these old strategies lies in their built-in flexibility, something industrial farming sacrificed for consistency. Medieval crop rotations read like weather contingency plans. If spring floods came, switch to water-loving barley. If summer brought scorching winds, fall back on deep-rooted lentils. A 13th century Lombard text lists 19 wheat varieties, each matched to specific climate scenarios: early maturing for wet years, late blooming for dry spells, even a peculiar black-eared strain resistant to both mildew and heat. Modern breeders, having narrowed wheat to a handful of uniform types, now scramble to recreate that diversity from seed banks preserving medieval remnants. Water management offers even starker lessons. While California's almond orchards guzzle groundwater faster than rains can replenish it, medieval Moorish manuals from arid Spain describe dry farming techniques that sound almost miraculous. They directed morning dew into buried clay pots, their porous walls releasing moisture slowly to roots. They mulched fields with crushed olive pits, reducing evaporation by 70%. Most remarkably, they planted indicator trees, old oaks whose leaves would curl days before drought stress became visible in crops, giving farmers advance warning to switch irrigation plans. Satellite technology now confirms what those farmers observed instinctively. Their systems used 60% less water than modern flood irrigation while yielding comparable harvests. The real urgency, though, lies in seed saving, an art we've nearly lost at our peril. Medieval farmers treated each harvest as a living library, selecting seeds not just for yield but for climate adaptability. A single 15th century Swiss Alpine manual documents 43 barley varieties, each bred for microclimates shifting every few hundred feet in elevation. Contrast that with today's industrial bread baskets, where 75% of global calories come from just 12 crops, genetically uniform, climate vulnerable, and owned by corporations. When record heatwaves struck France's wheat belt in 2020, the only fields that didn't fail were those planted with a rediscovered medieval strain nicknamed the Survivor. Its genetics naturally hardwired for thermal resilience. What's terrifying is how quickly this wisdom vanished. The same industrialization that promised food security inadvertently created fragility, replacing diverse, locally adapted systems with brittle monocultures. A single line from a 1480 farming manual now reads like prophecy. He who plants one kind of grain reaps one kind of fate, yet there's hope in the margins. From Australian vineyards reviving medieval stone mulching to beat heat waves, to Kenyan women's cooperatives planting drought-resistant orphan crops from Byzantine texts, the old ways are resurfacing where they're needed most. These manuscripts aren't relics, they're time-tested climate manuals waiting for us to turn the page.